Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 5 of Nourish and Flourish. I hope everyone has had a great week, and I hate that I'm not able to see you all in person during this holiday week, but I hope you're enjoying yourself and doing something fun with loved ones, family, or just taking some time to relax post our stress class last week. Let's get started. I do anticipate that this class will be a little bit shorter since there won't be as much in the moment interaction. Please take time to pause any aspect of the class, write down notes, ponder, since this is a recorded week. So this past week, I hope that we were able to be more mindful regarding our stress and our stress management. We're really adding to our reflection when it comes to building on class over class, the stuff that we talk about, as you can see with these bullet points. Last week's class, so much so with stress, I think allows us to be a little bit more reflective of how our environment impacts our intake. And I really do hope that we were able to observe how we were feeling, observing our body, and making changes based on that. I'm hoping that we were able to add in some modalities in order to help our stress management, things like joyful movement to decrease stress, or maybe even some journaling. It's a favorite of mine, something that a lot of individuals sometimes are afraid to start, but can be really effective. So if you haven't done any of these things too, it's not like you can't add them in. You are all more than welcome to continue to explore different aspects of quote our homework assignments. I hope you were able to create new ways to incorporate more gut-friendly foods. We talked about that in week 3, but of course, all that information is still relevant. I hope that you felt empowered knowing how each macro and micronutrient benefits our health, pairing properly, meeting with your dietitian one-on-one to discuss how to achieve more balance on your plate and in life and stress. And of course, logged into Healthy to review your Nourish and Flourish resources. Was hoping that everyone would get the chance to reflect on what the previous weeks had offered. So now let's talk all about sleep, because that is what this week is about. Week 5, Nourish and Flourish. We spoke about stress last week. A great way to decompress from stress is to relax, but relaxing can take on a whole new aspect when we are truly resting well with our sleep. So today's objectives are going to be understanding what affects sleep and how to achieve quality sleep. We're also going to learn the connection between sleep and overall health and wellness. I know most of you are probably like, man, if I don't sleep, I don't think I'm being the healthiest version of myself. But there's a really good chance that we're going to uncover some reasons why that may be, that you can connect a little bit further into your own health journey. And then we're also going to learn how to create healthier sleep habits that could be sustainable. Just like most of the other classes, take what serves you throughout this upcoming presentation, because maybe some of these things aren't super relevant to you in your health journey, but and I don't want to force something that you're like, I've never really paid attention to that. I don't think that's a problem. I don't want you to become hyper fixated on something that's not broken. So take what serves you, leave the rest, but do leave here today with some sort of recommendations that can help you achieve better sleep that will last your lifetime. So what is sleep? Much like our other aspects of health that we've reviewed thus far, Nourish and Flourish, we like to define what is like the core basis of what we're speaking about. And sleep is a natural recurring state of reduced consciousness and bodily activity, essential for rest, restoration, and overall health. When we sleep, it's going to restore our energy, which is probably not a shock to anybody listening to this. But we know that when we're not sleeping, right, all of these other things may be impacted. When we sleep, it's important that our body rests because it's going to enhance our immune function. It also promotes brain function. It supports physical repair and it regulates our body's hormones. When I used to work in dialysis, we used to speak a lot about stress and sleep in general, sleep quality. And if any of you are unfamiliar with what dialysis is, it is a type of machine that filters out the blood when the body's kidneys are not doing their job properly. So we need an external source in order to be able to, of course, filter the blood, make sure that your body is not becoming toxic with the things that it should be filtering out. And many, many times when I would consult with the doctors that we were working with, the nurses, the other dietitians, we would speak about making sure that people were getting adequate and restful sleep, because the kidneys in particular can not necessarily heal themselves, but we know that cellular rejuvenation, cellular stimulation, and the health of even down to our organ cells can be so much so impacted by getting adequate sleep. So we did see a direct correlation with individuals who slept poorly, having poor kidney function, and therefore needing dialysis more, which is not what we were aiming for. So sleep, super vital, super important. If we talk about sleep, it's also important for us to talk about circadian rhythm. I want to give you guys all a little bit more of like the scientific uh, know-how about why our bodies are sleeping, and what's happening when we sleep that makes all of these things possible, like, that cellular rejuvenation, etc. So first things first is circadian rhythm. And you've probably heard about circadian rhythm before. Sometimes people hear about it referring to themselves and their health, like what we're going to talk about today, but sometimes like referring to like other creatures, other mammals, because it is true, different species have different types of circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is really important because it's like an internal clock that runs for about 24 hours. It's like our brain's natural like rhythm that it's going off of in order to know when and how to expect rest, in correlation to the environment around us. Our circadian rhythm is controlled by a part of the brain. It is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. Don't expect any of you guys to necessarily remember that, nor do you have to. But this part of our brain reacts to light from our eyes. So you think about it, right? When we wake up in the morning, usually it's around the time that the sun rises. When we go to bed at night, or when we start feeling sleepy, it's when it starts getting dark. Our circadian rhythm is regulated by light stimulus that's coming to our eyes. This rhythm affects when we sleep, obviously, because it's going to make us either drowsy or stimulated, how our hormones work, how our body regulates our temperature, and our metabolic rate, our metabolism. Even without daylight, our bodies keep following this rhythm. It's almost because of the lack of light also sends different types of signals. And messing with this rhythm, specifically like night shift workers, which I had mentioned last week in our stress class, or lots and lots of overnight travel, can cause sleep problems and therefore mood changes and leading into health issues. Now, what's really interesting about this circadian rhythm is that, years and years and years ago, prior to modern electricity, prior to modern technology, the only true like sense of light that we had coming into our eyes was from either the sun or from fire, right? That was illuminating how light and electricity does nowadays. And what we know is that technology and some of this artificial light that we use to see during the evenings can impact our circadian rhythm. So commonly we see that there is a shift of what and how our body is responding based off of, our exposure to darkness in a way. So if we are consistently looking at our tablets or at our cell phones or at our computers, that's almost going to stimulate our eyes as if the sun were, just in this natural evolutionary circadian rhythm state. So we do see that right? Things that drift away from kind of the natural state of how our bodies have adapted throughout nature, can impact our circadian rhythm. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But do know that light stimulus to the eye, say it be sun, say it be tablet, say it be light bulb, is all going to stimulate our circadian rhythm in a similar way. And we'll see how that works in just a second. I also did want to mention how stress and sleep are also impacted, because stress will also, in a way, impact circadian rhythm. And that is because we know that sleep and stress are shared by the same pathway, which is the HPA axis that we spoke about so much last week, that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And when the HPA axis is disrupted because of really crazy amounts of stress, trauma, etc., it can cause disruptions in our sleep cycles. Poor quality sleep, inconsistent sleep, and lack of sufficient sleep can all increase the activity of the HPA axis, which can lead to even more stress, arousal, and health complications. We spoke so much about that, but I do want us to connect the dots to see how these things are impacted. We do know that high cortisol levels, which we spoke about last week, knowing as that stress hormone that's produced, high cortisol levels can also cause or perpetuate sleep disturbances like chronic insomnia or sleep apnea. Now, cortisol holds a kind of a pretty special place in looking at the circadian rhythm and sleep response, because cortisol itself is a huge player in our circadian rhythm. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is a fun little diagram, not the fanciest, but the trends are what I want you to recognize. So our bodies have something called a cortisol awakening response. And what happens is when we wake up in the morning, our cortisol, when we get that light to our eye, right? If we've been sleeping in the dark and, suddenly sunshine is coming in through our blinds, or, we open the blinds and we have this huge rush of sunlight. Cortisol is the component in the body that is increased. And cortisol, right, as we reviewed last week, it's what makes our bodies more alert. It makes our bodies ready to do daily activities and functions with the type of, pretty normal stress response that we would need to get through the day. So we like to be, seeing cortisol kind of really high in the mornings, that we would expect it to be high in the mornings to get our body up, doing the things that we need to do. Gradually throughout the day, as you can see here, it tapers off. That's pretty consistent. Now, I will say that there are some individuals, specifically people who are caffeine addicted, or maybe who work the night shift, where this may be really off. But this is what we would want to see, right? You wake up, and then as it gets closer to bedtime, we see that cortisol really, down regulates throughout the body. We want to see it go down because we don't need a huge cortisol spike to wake us up when we're trying to go to bed. In contrast to cortisol, we have this orange line here, which is our melatonin. And melatonin and cortisol, they work in contrast to each other. Maybe you've heard of melatonin before, and melatonin is the type of hormone that makes us sleepy. It makes us drowsy. It makes us feel more rested. And it does that specifically so we can sleep. We can get restful, good sleep. And just as you would expect, as two things that work in contrast to each other, we're going to have pretty opposite amounts when one is high and one is low. So yeah, melatonin's going to be super low in the morning because cortisol is high. We're waking up, we're getting ready to do our daily life activities. But then as we start to get into the evening, we see that as it gets darker out, as that light stimulus decreases, melatonin begins to spike, and we have that big increase while cortisol is a lot lower. And this is what this pattern should look like. And any of the things that, like stress like disturbances that would happen in our circadian rhythm could potentially impact this cycle, which is not optimal, right? We don't want to have high amounts of cortisol in the evening when we're trying to sleep. In opposition, we also don't want melatonin really high and smack dab in the middle of our day. You guys may be able to connect some dots here, because what we commonly see is when we have, what is it, daylight savings time, and it starts getting really, really dark, really, really early, like at 3 p.m. People will typically tell me, man, it's really hard for me to adjust. I start getting drowsy. I had this whole chunk of my evening that typically was where I had lots of energy, where now I'm really not having much at all. And we can kind of point the finger and say that is our body's natural circadian rhythm response in relationship to this cortisol and melatonin peaks and valleys. So since we're talking a little bit about, our cortisol, our stress, and how it impacts, I do want to discuss a little bit about what sleep deprivation is. So when we're not on a good sleep schedule, when we're having lots of stress, when maybe that this cortisol awakening response is a little bit haywire because of XYZ, we tend to have sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation is classified as inadequate or insufficient sleep. Now, I oftentimes talk to people about their sleep amount and how many hours they're sleeping. And I say, "Oh, how is your night's sleep been going? How many hours are you getting?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm doing good. I'm like getting 4 or 5 hours, but that's better than like not sleeping." And yes, true. But we do actually see that sleep deprivation is quantified as anything that is less than 6 hours of sleep. So if we're getting 6 or less hours on a consistent basis, that could be classified as sleep deprivation or chronic sleep deprivation, which can lead to many, many symptoms. They can range from mild to severe, but we do know the longer that your body's not resting for adequate amounts of times, the more severe they could potentially be. Here are some examples of what sleep deprivation can physically manifest as. We talked a little bit about how stress and some of these things can physically have manifestations. And these are things like increased agitation, depression, and anxiety, increased hunger, which we'll talk about more, trouble paying attention, reduced alertness, reduced sex drive, poor judgment, reduced social activity. And then, of course, as a dietitian, why am I talking about these things? We do see it impacts our metabolic health. Lack of sleep has been linked to many diseases, including diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, and cardiovascular diseases. And since we are focusing on that holistic side of things, this is where we do want to have a preventative aspect going into our health journey. You know, Once again, I've said it before, salad doesn't exist in a vacuum where we are only telling you to eat your vegetables, right? Because, if you're not sleeping well and you're eating vegetables all the time, there still could be implications that are negatively impacting your health for short and long term. All of these symptoms would reduce an individual's quality of life and potentially decrease their ability to perform everyday tasks. So, sleep, very, very much so important. We also do know that there are sleep disturbances that can happen that can potentially impact the quality or quantity of your sleep. I do recommend that if any of these things in particular are really, causing you to have complications, or maybe you're giving your best effort to fall asleep, and then suddenly, I'm noticing every single night there is something in particular that is disturbing me. Talk with your dietitian. There may be resources that we can point you to that are really specific to your needs, or provide some recommendations. Now, we are going to review some of those things at the end of this class, but I will mention that once we can get vulnerable and talk with our healthcare providers about what's keeping us from sleeping our best, it's only going to, propel us to make sure we're getting the best rest. But these are some sleep disturbances, as you can see. Light and noise, temperature can be a big one. Uh, Having to wake up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, that's a big one that I see. If you are pregnant or having any hormonal changes, potential cortisol fluctuations, GI distress, so things like heartburn because of how you're sleeping, or just overall GI issues. Now, if you are noticing that you're having maybe consistent times where you're waking up in the middle of the night and there really is no true culprit that's waking you up, your eyes, you know, slam open and you're just awake suddenly at 3 a.m, do talk with Monica about your concerns, strictly because what we do see is that our cortisol awakening response will, if something is awry there, that is typically how our body responds. We just randomly have like these bursts of energy when we probably shouldn't be, and or we get really drowsy throughout different parts of the day when you would expect us to have energy. So let's talk a little bit about what good quality sleep is, because we spoke a little bit about all of the potential disturbances. We talked about the risks that are associated with poor sleep quality. And so let's talk about what we can do to make it better, and what that better looks like. So first things first is the term that I like to use, and that you'll see a lot of professionals use, is making sure you have good sleep hygiene. So these are things that are all going to be related to that quality of sleep, to assure that you are getting that true rest that's not going to put you at risk for anything that we've spoken about. First thing is enough time. So making sure you're getting in enough hours. We want to make sure it's high quality sleep. So when you fall asleep, you stay asleep, you feel good, you're comfortable, etc. We want it to be uninterrupted, and it supports proper cortisol, melatonin regulation throughout the day. So you're getting in enough sleep during the times when you should be sleeping, in order to make sure that you have energy throughout the day when you would expect your body to be agile and doing the things it should be doing. And we also want to make sure that you are achieving all of your sleep stages, which we'll also talk about. So we do have 5 different types of stages of sleep. The first one is when we are first falling asleep. Light sleep, falling asleep. We have our second stage of sleep, which is when our body starts to relax even deeper into that rest. Our heart rate will slow and our body temperature will decrease. Stage 3 and 4 are deepest, when we're really in deep sleep. So our heart rate is lowered, our body temperature has decreased, we are in that deep sleep, and this is when our muscle and tissue repair happens. You may be moving around here still, tossing and turning occasionally, nothing that would disturb you. But then when we get into REM sleep, that's when we have body paralysis and dreams begin to occur. And that REM sleep is very important as well for that muscle and tissue repair. Each stage, though, does allow for the body to recuperate and rest, and are all really important in making sure that you're resting. We've got some pretty cool technology nowadays that will show you if you get into different parts of your stages of sleep. Um, I'm not really sure about how incredibly accurate all of them are, but I do find that with a lot of people who track their sleep, they can find really common trends that may either be hurting or helping their wellness journeys. So if you have like an Apple Watch, or if you have any sort of Fitbit, if you've never paid attention to some of those aspects, it may be a cool time to, engage with that. I will share a story that I did have someone who was tracking their sleep, and they were sleeping, what they thought was a good quality hours, numbers of sleep. But when they actually dove into it a little bit further, they saw that they were never really getting into those deeper sleep stages like 3, 4, and into REM sleep for a good portion of the night. It was pretty low. And so we were able to address that and do some sleep studies in order to help that. So I will say, if anybody who is listening or participating feels like, I'm giving everything my best effort. I'm still not having any resolution. Sleep is still really hard. There are other professionals and sleep studies that can be done in order to determine if there is a deeper problem. And we don't want to neglect that either, because no amount of broccoli salads or meeting with your dietitian will potentially resolve that. So when it comes to our sleep stages, though, these listed repeat in cycles of about 90 to 110 minutes long. So during one night, when one average sleeping evening night, we could go through this cycle 3 to 4 times. And that's kind of what's expected. We want that to happen. That is natural. That is good. So, don't be, afraid that like, oh man, like, I woke up in the middle of the night, I ruined the whole sleep stage and the whole sleep cycle. No, it is expected that we go through it multiple times. So, one evening, not waking up in the middle of the night and disrupting it isn't going to throw everything off for the following day. Sleep requirements. So how many hours do we need, in order to adequately go through those sleep cycles, those sleep stages as many times as we need to get that cellular rejuvenation, to get that stimulus to our brain, good cellular turnover for our immune function, etc. And it really is dependent on our gender, our age, and our stage of life. They don't vary all too much, but I will say that we do see that women tend to need a little bit more. So, on average, a female needs 7 to 9 hours per night. And I see that most women, especially mothers who have high amounts of stress on them, need more towards that like 9 hours, 8 or 9. Getting in 7 hours isn't going to put you, in super high risk, but I do think that most women I talk to say when they achieve that 8 to 9 hours, they feel their best. During pregnancy, when women are growing a little baby, they do need that 8 to 10 hours, so more. And during postpartum, the amount realistically becomes 7 hours. And that's typically because you may be waking up in the middle of the night, feeding your newborn, breastfeeding, what have you. But if we could still shoot for 7 hours, that minimum, that's super important. Men need on average a little bit less, so they can survive more so on that 7 to 8 hours per night. And as we age, the amount of sleep that we need decreases. So when you look at like a newborn will need sleep anywhere from 14 to 18 hours per day. And that number can decrease to around 6 hours per night as we age as well too. I think about my daughter. She is going to be 2 actually on the 5th of July, and she homegirl can nap. I'm envious half the time, but we'll put her down for her midday nap, and she'll sleep for a good 3 4 hours. And that just speaks to her age, right? Like, I don't, even if I think I want to sleep for that amount of time, I don't think my body would let me. She sleeps through the night and then sleeps another 4 hours during the day. I just don't think that would be the case for me. But our needs are different as we age. Oh, and I do want to mention too that this is to reiterate what I had said before about um, us needing to make sure that we get in more than 7 hours, because anything 6 hours or less is considered that sleep deprivation. So if you are consistently getting in less than 6 hours per night, we definitely need to make sure that we are talking with a professional to help us figure out how we can improve that. Diurnal sleep patterns is also something worth noting. What I find is that sometimes people are really gung ho about their wellness routines and activities. So, hey, I'm going to sleep really good for a week and then I'm just going to party on the weekends, right? And what we see is that's also not super happy and good for our bodies. There really is no IOU in sleep world. Not like, oh man, I missed like a lot of sleep this past weekend or this past week, so I'm going to just sleep extra this upcoming week. Well, yes, your body may need to recuperate, so you may be sleeping more, but it's just not how it works. That those ratios don't exist. When we see those patterns happening, when individuals are sleeping, maybe adequate amounts at night, and then for periods of time not sleeping as well at night and then sleeping more during the day, we consider those diurnal sleeping patterns. So that's two different types of sleeping patterns that is in contrast to what our circadian rhythm is trying to tell us. So diurnal sleeping patterns refer to a day and night schedule that is regulated in humans by hormones and those wavelengths of light, as mentioned. Diurnal refers more to humans and many animals that are awake during the day and asleep at night. In contrast, there is nocturnal individuals or nocturnal animals that you would think that sleep during the day and are awake at night. When we have this contrasting sleep pattern that can potentially happen, there are also risks that are along with it. So, of course, it's going to be poorer sleep quality because if you're trying to, make up for sleep, there is a chance that like you're sleeping during the day when your body and mind, are expecting to be stimulated by light. So you're contrasting with that natural circadian rhythm. You have increased health risks like weight management, cardiovascular disease, because it does put pressure on your heart, and potential mental health issues. But do just remember that our bodies are designed for nighttime sleep, and altering this pattern can negatively impact hormone balance, metabolism, and overall well being. So, just my little pedestal to just say, like, keep things balanced and consistent, just like how our plate is supposed to be. Sleep and metabolism. So, because I'm a dietitian, I'm going to always talk about how this relates to our metabolic health. And of course, everything that we've seen as risk factors or things that as a dietitian I'd be concerned about. But specifically looking at these metabolic pathways as being something that we want to make sure are being catered to and put healthy habits into place so our metabolism is better. And sleep is no different than the rest. So sleep does have the ability to impact every every bodily system that we see, from the brain all the way down to our metabolism. When we don't get enough sleep, our hunger hormones can increase and can cause us to want to eat more food. So we talked a little bit about cortisol last week, and if we've got these changing sleep cycles patterns that we're applying to our body, there's an potential issue that cortisol will be misregulated. And if cortisol is high, what we do see is that it increases that blood sugar, which we spoke about. But we also see that cortisol makes our bodies want more higher carbohydrate and higher calorie foods, because realistically, biologically, our body is thinking, I didn't get enough rest the night before. Rest is required for me to have energy. So, with a lack of rest, I need to find energy elsewhere. And what is the best place that we can find that? Simple carbohydrates, high calorie foods, and our body craves it. And it becomes really, really hard for us to tell our bodies no during this. It's like really, truly fighting against our own biology, right? So, we've got individuals who I see that are, really sleep deprived, and they're like, man, I have these cravings, and it's just like this ravenous hunger that will overtake me. And then they think it's like a willpower issue. And I'm like, man, no, like your cortisol, your hunger hormones are really kind of wacky right now. There's misfiring happening because we're not getting enough sleep. So we do want to make sure that we are getting in enough sleep to properly make sure that our metabolism is working well. And I will say that there are a lot of studies that exist on this, showing how in the mornings when people are even just away from their normal sleep pattern and routine, so maybe they typically do sleep 8 hours a day, and then suddenly, they slip below 6. The next day can be drastically impacted by the types of cravings that they have and how much food that they are eating. So let's talk a little bit about sleep hygiene. So, I've probably scared everybody thinking like, oh my goodness, if I don't sleep enough, I'm going to have all of these crazy issues. But we do know that sleep is pretty mandatory. Like there's no ignoring it. We all get tired when we haven't slept enough, or we all get tired when it starts getting dark. And do know that like your body's going to tell you if you need more sleep. So listen to it, observe it like we talk about in order for you to plan appropriately. But these types of tips that I'm going to review today are hopefully going to get you feeling even better and having more restful sleep on a more regular basis. So, first things first is I want you to build an ideal bedtime routine. And I feel like this is something that we correlate with children all too often that we're like missing out on as adults because like we're like, oh man, like that's what my kids do. No, no, no. A good sleep hygiene consists of having that calming night routine, making sure that you are, sleep getting into bed and getting into a comfortable position, and having that intention around that, creating boundaries for yourself that work best for you and for your night's sleep. So do not think it's just for your kids. If you haven't done this in a really long time, please do. And we're going to talk about ways that you can build that bedtime routine. So I like to start off with encouraging a wind down window. So this is time to create and be intentional about a set of activities that you're going to do before you go to bed to help you relax, help your mind relax, help your body rest. And these are things that you can repeat, that you will enjoy, that will almost tell your body, like, hey, body, we're getting ready to go to sleep. Similar to an alarm clock, I would love if you all set a bedtime reminder to keep as a simple reminder when you begin to wind down. I think that Apple and probably Android, I know I have an Apple phone, I have an iPhone. They have an actual app that will allow you to set like this wind down window. So if you set that your bedtime is at um say 10:30, you can set that you want to have a 60-minute wind down window. And at 9:30, your phone will buzz or alert you saying, hey, you've got an hour before bedtime. What do you want to do with it? Right. And you could simply ignore it, or you can allow that to be a cue for you to start this wind down window. An example of a wind down window, whether you want to utilize your phone or if you want to just, try to build it into an intentional routine, is, maybe around 7:30, you get into your pajamas, right? Maybe not right before you go to bed. Wash your face, do your skincare, make a warm cup of tea 30 minutes later. From 8 to 8:30, drink your tea while finishing maybe some of your housework, cleaning up, kind of building that into some of those, what I call my mom chores. And then pair that with something that's enjoyable, right? Like reading. I'm a huge Colleen Hoover lover right now. Don't know if any of you like to read her books, but sitting in bed and reading and enjoying some literature right before I fall asleep is a really great way to wind down. And then, that 30 minutes of resting and winding down allows me to tuck myself into bed by, a good hour, say 9 o'clock, to potentially listen to meditation or maybe just fall asleep then naturally. So this shows you how an hour and a half can really give you some good cushion to have good and better sleep. We do want to minimize stimulants. So we do want to decrease interactions with things that could impact a change in our routine or a biological shift in our cortisol response. So as I mentioned, right, our cortisol awakening response is stimulated by light, and darkness is what helps that melatonin increase and bring cortisol down. We do want to decrease anything that would potentially bring cortisol up, including blue light, which we'll talk about, but we want to limit our exercise close to bedtimes because exercise will stimulate cortisol as well. So try to get in your exercise before 2 hours before you go to sleep. And then also limiting caffeine intake close to bedtime, because that's also going to impact how our body regulates that cortisol as well. And so that means drink your last caffeinated beverage 4 to 6 hours before you're planning on going to bed. That's a big old gap of time too. And why is that range so different? Different people metabolize cortisol in different ways. So if you are someone who's sensitive to caffeine, don't do it, I would say, within that 6 hour window of going to bed. So keeping your caffeine to the morning, which makes sense. And then we also want to decrease blue light exposure. Okay. So as I mentioned, Our human eyes have a really hard time differentiating between the light coming from our cell phone and the light coming from the sunshine. And if we're laying in bed when it's really dark outside, we're winding down, and then we're staring at a screen, that's going to allow our brain to say, well, there's more sunlight, right? Or so it thinks. So I'm going to produce more cortisol. And we see that being very, very stimulating. We see that being very biologically challenging for allowing our body to get into that rested and relaxed state in order for us to drift off to sleep naturally. And it does work in contrast to that melatonin production. So, other than just removing those screens, removing screen time from your nighttime routine, there are other things because I know it's kind of difficult. I read from my iPad, which does have blue light, and I like reading in bed, and it's just my easiest way to make sure I've always got a good book handy. So there are different things that you can do to make sure that you're combating this stimulant. And one is changing the settings in your phone, your laptop, or your iPad to night shift. This actually, you'll see like the hue of blue in, that back screen turn more to an orangish color. And that's going to be a little bit less harsh on your eyes and therefore produce less cortisol. And then if you don't have that option, maybe want to watch some TV or there's something, relevant, there are blue light blocking glasses that you can purchase literally like anywhere. I feel like I've seen them at the dollar store occasionally, but Amazon has them. And these are just normal glasses, not prescription, but they do have a coating on them that helps to block out that blue light that would eventually, give you that ability to not spike cortisol and decrease melatonin. So if you are someone who just naturally is going to want to look at screens in the evening, that's fine. I would definitely encourage looking into night shift or those blue light blocking glasses. So we want to minimize those stimulants, but we do want to maximize comfort. And these types of things may sound ridiculous, but like, please go and evaluate your surroundings when you are about to go to sleep, because all too often we neglect our self-care and we're like, I don't need that. I'll put that off to a different day. But really, like in the moment, it's impacting your sleep. It's impacting your quality of sleep. So don't put that off, because we know that that's really important for your health. So we do want to make sure that we have a good mattress. I've had a lot of people are like, oh, my mattress is, 10, 15 years old and like I should get a new one. But like, my kids need a new one before I do. And yes, maybe they do, but that doesn't mean that you don't also need a new mattress. You need to make sure that it is something that is going to support your posture, is not giving you backache, and is allowing you to have good restful sleep. The same thing goes for pillows and blankets. This is where it can be kind of fun to explore what you need. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Big Blanket Co. My husband and I were gifted for Christmas by one of our relatives, one of their blankets, and it has like a slightly weighted feature. So it's like a weighted blanket and it's huge. And when I slept with that thing, I didn't even realize how much I needed a weighted blanket. And so I'm just exploring different types of, pillow textures, pillow shapes, blanket sizes, blanket weights, blanket shapes, blanket material that can all maximize comfort and help you have more restful sleep. Temperature is another huge one. If you remember in our different types of sleep stages, our second sleep stage, our body temperature decreases once we start to get into that those deeper stages of sleep. And sometimes if the body has to work harder to bring the temperature down, or if your body is just like in an environment that is really, really hot, it becomes harder to have a good night's restful sleep. So it's been theorized, and I think there are some studies that do reflect that if you sleep in cooler temperatures, you do achieve a better sleep quality. But that is all, individualized. That is all dependent on you. So be intentional about whatever that looks like, and talk with your dietitian if you feel like you're not quite sure. Decrease disturbances. The biggest thing that I will say is like light and noise tend to be the biggest things that like are harder to predict, but something that we can arm ourselves from being subjected to waking up from. So first things first is noise. White noise machines are really great. Natural things like fans can serve as a white noise. I don't have it listed on here, but getting blackout curtains can be really beneficial to assure that light isn't sneaking in. When you are trying to sleep, say you live in a busy area, there's external, not sunlight hitting your window and potentially getting into that room. Another thing is to make sure that you're just discussing these comfort measures and discussing your intentions around sleep with your partner, if you are someone that is married or has a partner, because, maybe they don't prioritize or value the same things that you're going to be if you are starting a bedtime routine. But having those discussions can be really beneficial. I've seen it work many different times where it's just like, man, if this is something I'm really going to focus on, I need the person that I'm sleeping next to also be aware. Um, and then another little fun thing is you can always diffuse lavender. There are some studies that show that lavender as an essential oil can be really beneficial to relaxation. It's like that aromatherapy aspect. Another thing, even if you're like, "Man, I don't even wanna think about sleep that much," like, that maybe that's not where I wanna start, having just some rules around bedtime, maybe if your schedule is a little bit crazier, and that's with what is going to happen when you are in bed. So, if nothing else, try to stick with the boundaries of the 3 S's. So that means to reserve bedtime for those 3 S's, which is sleep, sex, and sickness. These are the only things that potentially we want to really take place in bed. Otherwise, our brains aren't gonna like click on that, hey, it's time to sleep when we get into bed. Because if you're working in bed or if you're doing other activities that aren't restful signalers, in bedtime or getting close to bedtime, your mind and even that circadian rhythm, and that biologic response is going to have a harder time falling in line. And of course, I have to talk about foods that can help with sleep. So, first things first is I want to say that any of these foods listed, none of these are going to be able to step in place of a good bedtime routine, quality hours, and proper sleep hygiene. No amount of cherries or kiwis in the world are going to get you, feeling more rested or feeling better for sleep if we're not doing these other things. But we do know that nutrition and different types of components in foods can be beneficial. So, foods high in electrolytes like magnesium, potassium, things that we all have spoken about in our previous weeks can support muscle relaxation. So, super important for making sure that, like, our muscles, our heart, everything is going to actually be able to get into a rested state. So eating balanced is going to be really important for getting in those electrolytes. But then we also know, as we spoke about last week, that eating balanced and making sure that we're not skipping meals will help our body not have a cortisol and biological reaction. We don't want to have a biologically stressed body because we're not eating properly, which can then increase cortisol and impact the body's ability to regulate melatonin and therefore sleep properly. So it is all connected. But we do see that there are some specific foods that can help produce melatonin, that can help relax our bodies. These are some that we do know of right now, and I do expect that we'll know a little bit more about other foods in the future that can be relaxing. First off is kiwis. Research shows that consuming 2 kiwis prior to bed, so during the day, can help with sleep quality. Kiwis do have really great anti-cancer components as well too that recent research has been showing. Cherries, tart cherry juice contains nitric oxide, which increases vasodilation, which will help the body relax because it's going to circulate your blood well. And there is some thought that cherries also do have, I think it's a good amount of magnesium, which helps to stimulate melatonin in your body as well. Chamomile, if you've ever heard of chamomile tea, which I'm sure you had, chamomile tea does have a mild sedative effect, a nice calming effect, so that can definitely help to relax you. And then nuts, which nuts also do contain small amounts of melatonin. I do also want to mention, because up here I did talk a little bit about how magnesium is related to electrolyte that electrolyte profile, helping your body just relax those muscles. Magnesium, we do propose, is part of creating melatonin. So a body that is deficient in magnesium may not be able to create the amounts of melatonin that your body needs. So foods high in magnesium can be really beneficial. Um, and we'll also talk here too about how some supplements can be beneficial. Where the first thing I do if somebody is like doing all that they should be doing, eating well, and still having sleep issues, melatonin is something that we can always supplement with. But do note that sleep supplements can have positive, but also negative effects. Okay. So, our first thing that we want to do if we're not sleeping appropriately is not jump to a supplement. We want to do all the other lifestyle things that we know are going to have a big impact in long term sustainability for our sleep schedule and long term effects for our health. Um, but there are some sleep supplements that are out there. I think magnesium is probably the most benign and the most helpful, that doesn't have a lot of negative effects. Please talk with your dietitian if you plan on starting any of these because there any sort of supplement, which we're going to talk all about next week, is potentially going to be a little bit there's going to be trade-offs that occur. Melatonin you can purchase in a capsule form in different amounts, 1 milligram, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. But here's the thing, when we supplement with melatonin, our body produces less because it thinks it's getting it in exogenously, which it is. So if we're getting it in through our diet, our body's like, I can downregulate my ability to make it, and therefore we become dependent on melatonin. Does that mean that we, never need to touch melatonin? Not necessarily. It's all going to be customized, situational. So please talk with your dietitian. And the same situations go for things like CBD and L-theanine or theanine, which is another really good like sedative relaxant that we find, but typically it's found in foods that are stimulating. So things like matcha and green tea have theanine in it, but you don't want to be drinking those right before bedtime. So do talk with your dietitian. Sometimes I see people really thrive with doing a little bit of sleep supplementation along with their bedtime routine to get them into the habit, and that can be helpful, but not for long-term use. All right, guys. So we spoke all about sleep today, and we're going to talk all about supplements next week. So did want to leave you guys off with that last slide. But big takeaways is that all individuals can achieve better sleep and sleeping patterns. Even if you do end up having some sort of sleep issue, or your schedule is really really tough to get in exactly what you want, there are different things that you can do that are really going to impact that sleep hygiene, even if it's small little tweaks here and there to improve sleep quality, improve the numbers, etc. Balance of intake, because I'm a dietitian, I have to talk about it, is vital to assure you're getting proper sleep. So we're not, missing meals, we're not eating enough. That's going to impact us biologically. And I want us to all add in routines that can allow us to stick to a good sleep schedule, promoting good sleep hygiene. This upcoming week, I know that this week with the holiday, it is kind of crazy. Myself and Monica are off, but definitely still speak with your dietitian on ways to help your sleep and any issues that you're potentially having with sleep, because maybe some of these things that I spoke about really resonate with you while others don't, but there's ways to tweak and customize what we spoke about today into your routine that will have really a heavy impact on both your quality of sleep and quality of life. Try adding in parts of a routine into your night, and check out our week 4 Sleepy Girl mocktail in your healthy resources. Of course, on the very, very last word, I have a typo, my apologies. But we have a Sleepy Girl mocktail that does incorporate some of those foods I discussed that help with sleep behavior, sleep hygiene, etc. I appreciate everyone joining me for this week where we speak all about sleep. Next week, we'll talk about supplements and what do I call it? Pills and potions. But they're all going to be potentially supplemental things that could be beneficial throughout your health journey. Um, but start here with sleep, manage your stress and your intake, and we'll go from there. I hope everybody has an amazing rest of your day and week ahead. And I will see everybody for week 6 of Nourish and Flourish. Thank you guys so incredibly much.